boa noite, bem-vindos ao programa Grande Entrevista. Esta noite temos a honra de ter connosco em estúdio a senhora Rachel Bartels para uma entrevista exclusiva sobre a indústria mineira em Moçambique. A senhora Rachel Bartels é responsável mundial da empresa de consultoria Accenture para a indústria mineira. Rachel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I would start off by asking just a simple question about the overall landscape of the mining industry in Mozambique. We know that there is much hype about Mozambique's natural resources. Based on your knowledge of the global mining scene, where exactly does Mozambique stand right now, and what are its competitive advantages?
Thanks a lot. Great to be here, Christiana. Mozambique's really blessed. I mean, as you know, you've got a significant coal deposit, and coal is one of the most important energy sources on the planet. You know, we've recently done a study on the coal market that we've just released, and you know, we expect that with oil, coal is going to remain one of the leading energy sources on the planet, you know, well beyond 2030. Which puts Mozambique in a very good position, both from its thermal and its coking coal position. But clearly, you know, there are some challenges. While you have a rich deposit, the reality is there are significant price pressures in the coal market. Both coking coal and thermal coal are, you know, prices are a lot lower than they were 2 years ago. And as you develop your deposits, it's going to be really important to make sure that you establish them to be long-life, low-cost coal deposits.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see Mozambique 10 years from now?
So, I mean, with my best hope is that you're going to have a thriving economy with, you know, some diversification out of, you know, agriculture and being supported by the mineral sector. I mean, you do have a very good opportunity. You've got some major mining companies interested in developing the deposits. So with some fair wind, you should be in a solid position.
Do you see the country as one of the top producers in the world? Top 3, for example?
Well, I think you have a potential to be in the top producers. Having said that, though, the largest producer in the world is actually China. And you know, there's a lot of competition from other producing markets. So the real challenge is going to be, in effect, getting your infrastructure to a point where you can actually export significant amounts of coal into the Chinese and the broader Asian market.
Mm-hmm. So what key steps must be taken for Mozambique to reach that global positioning?
I think the key one, I mean, just looking very much outside in, is that you really need to have a multi-stakeholder dialogue around how you want to develop your coal assets. And I mean, the key is really a multi-stakeholder agreement on, you know, how you really want to leverage the asset for the nation and for the people in a way that's both, you know, useful to the people now, but also useful to the population, you know, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I think when we've looked at, you know, around the world about developments in the industry, having that agreement across governments, having the agreement across industry, having the agreement across civil society is absolutely crucial. And if you just do it between one or two of those groups, then you don't actually have a policy that will survive, you know, election cycles and give comfort to companies that are making significant investments in developing, you know, for example, a coal asset.
Mm-hmm. Do you see signs right now that those agreements are being sought by the different stakeholders?
Well, I'm here as part of a World Economic Forum dialogue on responsible mineral development, and which is being sponsored by the Mozambique government. So given the number of people who are planning to attend, that would give me a great hope that actually people really are willing to do it. One of my observations is there's often a great willingness to have a discussion, and there's a great willingness to make decisions, and then it tapers off around actions, and it's going to be a matter of not just saying this is our strategy, this is what we want to do, but then it's actually taking the appropriate actions to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. One of the actions, I suppose, that should be taken is agreeing on quality standards for the industry. How can Mozambique boost its capacity to monitor the industry and those standards?
Mozambique has recently joined IETA, the Transparency Organization, and which I think is a great step to actually help build that capacity within governments. A lot of the major mining companies are already following major protocols. The ICMM, which is the International Council of Minerals and Metals, basically looks at a lot of the sustainability issues, and all of the major mining companies globally are actually members and are really working towards sustainable development. Because my experience and a lot of the work that we do with the major mining companies centers on license to operate. And there's a real view that, first comes safety, but then in order to actually operate in a region for the long term, because again, this isn't something for 5 years, this is something for 20, 30, 40, 50 years worth of mineral development. The miners really do understand and are working on a lot of programs around what should they do around stakeholder management, what should they look on local content, so how much are they actually purchasing locally, environmental challenges, how are they supporting biodiversity, how are they supporting local development. And a lot of, if you talk to most of them, this is one of the key planks of their success and why they think they should be actually helping countries to develop.
Okay. I know you have a global view of what's going on in the mining industry. You're one step ahead. So I'm wondering if, looking at the industry in Mozambique, can we expect some sort of innovation? Can the industry giants in Mozambique set a trend for the rest of the world?
When you talk about innovation, because innovation is a great word.
Sure.
What do you mean by innovation?
Well, you're the expert here, Rachel, but I'm speaking, for example, about automation or, yeah.
Okay. So, for us in the sector, me working in the sector and the companies that I work with, I would say innovation takes a lot of different routes. A lot of people, when they talk about mining, it's innovation, it's driverless trucks, driverless trains, it's automated drill blasting devices, it's 3D printing, it's use of drones.
I'm not talking about drones.
It's it's all, but it's technology driven. And so before I just talk a bit about that, innovation comes in a lot of different guises. It also comes in how you do processes and how you actually work and how you execute. Mm-hmm. And so my view is, the miners are always looking for new innovations. All of them have got programs, and they're really saying, what are the new ideas we can actually drive into our business, and then looking at where it makes most sense to actually implement them. And so, I fully expect over time you will see those in Mozambique, and, from what I've seen everywhere else, there will be some ideas coming out of Mozambique to populate the rest of the planet. Looking specifically at automation, it's a huge topic for the mining sector. But what we're actually finding is that companies tend to really look at their automation program not as a blanket across the entire operation, but really about selective implementation where it makes most sense. So I'm seeing some clients who are literally doing very specific automations, and it's actually driven off safety. Because if they automate a certain thing, then they actually reduce the number of people who have to go into the area, and thus actually they're less likely to come to harm. Mm-hmm. And so it's not driven off production increase. It's actually not driven off of moving the jobs away. It's actually it's a safety safety issue.
Can you give us an example of one of those automated processes?
So some of the things are around how you can use mini robots around maintenance processes. And so when you've got equipment running, how do you can use the robot to actually help you maintain the equipment, as opposed to having to put a person close up or stopping the equipment. So that would be one example.
Okay. Could that kind of innovation, or if we look specifically, for example, at automated trains, could that compromise the number of jobs for Mozambicans?
It's a really good question. We're actually currently doing a study on the impact of automation in the workforce, and we've been interviewing a lot of different companies. both in mining as well as the broader sector. And the overwhelming comment that comes back is that you don't actually make your automation case on headcount reduction. That's not what the business case is actually about. When people looked at automated trucks, and you talk to the miners about the savings they receive from automated trucks, they don't talk about the cost savings of the driver. Automated trucks give you a better profile on your tires. So you have to replace your tires less often. And when your a single tire costs $50,000, then that's a huge impact, and it is actually a bigger impact than the actual salary itself. But so it's not about, I'm going to say it's not about headcount. What we are finding, though, in this study, and it's been backed up by some of the mining companies that I've spoken to, is that actually they're finding that it's not reducing their workforce as much as shifting their workforce. So they're allowed to do more things remotely. So they don't have to fly people into remote locations anymore. They can do them in more central locations. They're also finding that actually the skill set is shifting. So now they need people who are more technically competent, because you've got to actually maintain, it's more about maintaining the equipment and managing the data flows from the remote operations that you're doing. So it's less around a headcount reduction, but more of a shift in terms of the type of work that people are doing.
Okay, you mentioned the skill set and the technical skills, which brings us back to the workforce. And one of the concerns, I suppose, that has arisen is that these projects obviously generate a lot of jobs, but for the local community, but they are mostly low-skilled workers. Would you know of any references in terms of countries or companies that have taken measures to integrate local talent in top management positions?
So, but first off, I'd say actually when you go talk to all of our major clients, they actually run specific leadership programs where they literally are looking at their local talent and saying, okay, who's going to be the next supervisor, who's going to be the next manager, who's going to be the next person who could be tracking to sit on the the executive team. And they actually run formal programs in order to actually encourage that. I've seen that in Australia, I've seen it in Indonesia, I've seen it in Mongolia, I've seen it in the DRC. So I've seen it all, actually all over the place where they are literally working it out. And the reality is most expats do want to go home, and it's a far greater thing to actually have the local talent. And in the case of one company, they want to grow the local talent so they can export the local talent and make the local talent an expat somewhere else, and really leverage it from a diversity perspective. So you see lots of examples. I think the key thing is going to be the evolution, and that you're going to need to grow the talent. This doesn't happen overnight, and it's what kind of training programs are governments, are companies putting in place, whereby you are actually building the skills and capabilities, not just to do the mining, but to run the businesses, to develop local businesses that can supply to the mining companies. And you need to look at it almost more holistically, because what you need to do is actually build that skill set, and then there's a challenge of building it in remote locations,
right,
on top of it.
Right. So ultimately, we could be looking at Mozambique becoming an exporter of highly skilled labor in the mining industry.
I think you could.
Would that be very optimistic, or?
I think it's about a time scale.
Right.
If you're actually making those investments in actually upskilling your people, then that is actually a possibility. And I think the key, though, is how much actually you're investing in that talent development and how aligned it is across what's going on in your colleges, your universities, your teaching schools, your apprentice programs, and how well that's aligned with global standards, how well that's integrated with the programs the companies run themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, imagine you are a small entrepreneur, Mozambican entrepreneur in Tet province. and you see all this action going on, and you think, now how can I tap into this? What would your strategy be?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is go to the internet and learn as much about what's going on in mining and what my product could, where my product or what I'd like to sell could actually be used. I mean, so that would be one thing.
Yeah. You would need internet access, though.
You would need internet access. The other one is that a lot of the mining companies are actually running training schools, and so there is actually information out there that's available to learn more about the companies that you are, that or the mining sector itself. So part of this is how do you actually access into it, and they are linking up with local chambers of commerces and groups that are actually about helping to build businesses that are more or less sophisticated depending on where you are. So that would be one. And then I would, so it's part of it's really looking about what can you do. I mean, I know a local entrepreneur, not in Mozambique, who was like, okay, well, they've got X number of people coming into this site. They're going to need beds. I am going to actually approach the company and sell them beds. And they'd made the approach and said, look, I can supply you these beds. You're going to need, 10,000 beds. I can get them to you. And now has got the bedding, the bed contract. So you don't need to think in the context of, I need to provide a big piece of equipment. Miners need people who are willing to, work with actually, repairing their tires. They need people who are actually going to actually, do a retooling of engines, of all different kinds of valves and things like that. And you don't need to think huge in the context of can I supply them with a big truck, but actually there's a lot of little things that actually make up a mining operation, and it's sort of saying which ones of those do you want to go in, and then starting to have the dialogue, because the miners really like to build local content. We've set up a lot of programs with both the mining and, to be honest, the oil and gas sector, where you actually develop local suppliers. And one of it would just be, think about what you could actually bring and then go approach the mining companies.
Mm-hmm. Right. You mentioned access to information. There is a certain notion that some of these mining companies are a bit reluctant to disclose information on key indicators, which leads us to a transparency issue. How would you persuade the mining companies to disclose data, say, on local purchases versus global purchasing volume?
So my observation is the miners actually, a lot of them already disclose a lot of information. And actually, to be honest, it's more a matter of knowing where to look rather than, is it easily accessible? And I think for me, one of them is always about, incentives. It's also about how you're actually, what you want to do with the data and what behaviors you're actually trying to encourage. And part of it for me is then actually just having a dialogue with those companies to say, look, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're trying to encourage in terms of behaviors. How can we actually work together to show both evidence, but also to encourage this kind of behavior. So if you're looking for greater content, local content development, it would be around, what are you really trying to achieve with it? Because it's, how do you define local content? When you say it's a local supplier, how do you define a local supplier?
How do you define it, Rachel?
Well, there's different ways to look at it. I mean, is a local supplier somebody who is local and 100% owned? Is a local supplier somebody who is a local company but who is in partnership with a worldwide organization? Is it 50% owner, 51 or 49% ownership, or is it a foreign company that has come into Mozambique to actually develop the local market and is actually, you could argue, 100% local, 100% global, who is actually helping to support employing local people, developing the local market? And so, you can, I think I always question what definition are you actually using in that respect?
Okay. Now, looking ahead, 10, 15 years from now, how much does Mozambique stand to gain or lose, depending on how its natural resources are managed?
Well, I think there's a big prize, and I think, you know, that implies that if you manage it well, there's a significant reward for the country. But then if you don't manage it as well, then, you know, you won't actually have that reward. And so my view is Mozambique does need to really think about how it wants to enable development of those resources, and in a reasonable time horizon. I think there needs to be a bit of pace around development, because there are other places on the planet that are looking for investment money, you know, for development of their assets, and, you know, companies need to move on and actually, you know, build out the profiles. So I think there's a big prize to go for.
And to wrap up, you're a senior expert and advisor on the industry. You have access to decision makers. So if you were to hold a one-on-one behind closed doors with a top Mozambican decision maker, what kind of advice would you give him or her?
I think the key one, and then I'll use a you know, analogy. There are 5 frogs on a log, and one decides to jump. How many frogs are still on the log? And there's still 5 on the log, because making a decision and acting are not the same things. And so what I would really be advising is really around what are the actions you're going to take to make it happen. Because deciding to do something and actually acting on it are 2 very different things.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
You're welcome.
E foi a grande entrevista desta semana. Obrigada por ter estado connosco. Continue na companhia da STV.